For my teaching with technology presentation, I chose to look at collaborative technologies. And the reason I chose to look at collaborative technologies is because all of the readings and discussions we had, everything seemed to be looking at collaboration. And the more research I did, it kept seeming like collaborative learning was almost synonymous with new literacy instruction. So I wanted to explore this further and see how I could best implement technology to support collaborative instruction. And for me, I started to see that collaboration was a way to change the role of the educator. One of the articles that I read about was looking at how implementing technology was really changing the role of the teacher. And one of the studies was done early. It was conducted in 2003 at Duke University. And the author was Kathy Davidson, and she was saying that what they decided to do was more of a social experiment, and they gave all the incoming freshmen iPods for free. And they told the professors at the institution that they would give all of their classes free iPods as long as they implemented the technologies. Well, the incoming students were really excited to get the free iPods, but it made the upperclassmen upset because they were paying the same tuition, but why didn't they get the technology? So they told them that if they could convince their professors to implement this technology, that they would also receive the technology for free. So they started to communicate with their professors and began working with them. And Davidson noticed that the role of the professor started to change, that the professor was no longer the lecturer, but rather working alongside the students. And they started to find really neat ways to incorporate the technology into the classroom. And once they got the technology implemented, all the students got the technology for free. So they really started to see a shift in the role of the educator in the classroom. And the final piece is that technology has really changed us from being very procedural to being multitaskers. And this is something we have talked about, but something that I didn't consider before my research is that in the 20th century, we really needed to be linear and very procedural, because when the assembly line was constructed, you had to do step one before you could move on to step two. And that's the way our education system is set up. We need to complete step one before we can move on to step two. Well, once the boom of technology happened, we no longer had to do this linear process. Once we had access to the internet, we were able to jump around and access lots of different information almost simultaneously. So it created this generation of multitaskers. And so collaborative technologies really allows us to embrace that multitasking mentality. So for collaborative technologies, we read about in Serafini's book that it can be divided into two categories. You have the synchronous and the asynchronous. So the synchronous is when you communicate in real time, such as having a live classroom discussion, or the asynchronous is when you can communicate at different times. So when we have our online classes and we all post at different times depending on what's most convenient for us. And for the purpose of time, I am sharing with you my research on the synchronous technology tools, and I chose two, so the Lino and Chatzy technology tools. So Lino, I'm only going to focus more on my lesson. So Megan did a really nice job talking about the tool itself. So it's an interactive Canvas tool that you can implement into your classroom. The lesson objective here, I try to keep both lesson objectives very broad so you can implement it whether it's in kindergarten all the way up through high school, college. I wanted to keep them broad so you could think about different ways you could implement it into your classroom. So I think all of us are familiar with the KWL chart, and so you could implement Lino as a KWL chart. So you could have students post what they know in one color, so I chose the pink, and then what they want to know in another color, so I chose blue. And then once you are finished with that, you could put your Lino Canvas on hold, and then as you continue doing your research, your study, come back to the board and add what they have learned in a final color. So I chose yellow. So you can keep returning to your board, and as a class, go and add what they have learned and keep layering that process. So it makes the KWL chart a more interactive process. So for the standards, I tried to incorporate student standards, teacher standards, and college and career readiness standards for each one of these. When I began this process, I was thinking, oh, it'll be really easy, collaborative technologies, it'll always go with the collaboration standards. And that's not necessarily the truth, because depending on how you design your lesson, your standards are going to change. So for this one, I found that the research and information fluency and the digital citizenship were the two best student standards. And then for the teacher standard, it was design and develop digital age learning experience and assessment. So for the student standards, this would be the beginning of a research process. So they are showing you what they know and what they want to know. So they're having to plan and guide their learning. So for me, this was the best tool or best standard to select. And then digital citizenship. They're coming up with what they know and what they want to know, but they're not doing it independently on their own graphic organizer. They are doing it as a collective group. And since they're doing it as a collective group, they need to be respectful of each other's ideas. And they need to be productive. They need to be writing ideas that are on topic. They can't be going off into their own direction in la la land. So they need to be productive, collaborative, and working towards a common goal. And what I liked about the teacher standard is that we are all familiar with a KWL chart. And we're taking this common tool, but then adapting it with technology. So we're taking this authentic learning experience and incorporating this contemporary tool. So I think it was the best blend and best standard to meet the lesson objective that I chose. And then for the college and career readiness standard, comprehension and collaboration was the best to fit, because it is to prepare for and participate effectively in a range of conversations and collaborations. So they could be talking with peers, and then they could be getting on and posting. So written collaboration, they're collaborating aloud in a small group. You could launch and have a whole group conversation. So you're building off of each other's ideas. When you're using the sticky notes, you have to express your ideas clearly. So you have to be able to know what your own thoughts are, and then you're also building off of each other's ideas. So the tool itself, what are some benefits to Lino? It's a great collaborative tool to use together in real time. So you can see what all of your students' ideas are. So sometimes when you fill out the KWL chart or when you're doing bell work, you only get to call on a select few students. You don't get to hear the ideas of the entire class. Whereas using a digital canvas, you can really see what everyone is thinking and the direction of your entire class. Something else I like about this tool is that it appeals to multiple intelligences. So you can have your students who are visual learners, it appeals to them. You have your students that are very much writing focused, it appeals to them. Your students who need that social interaction, it can appeal to them as well. And your students who have to be doing something, it supports them. So this one tool can really appeal to the needs of a wide variety of learners. And a lot of these synchronous tools do not allow you to save, or at least save for an extended period of time. This tool allows you to save and come back weeks, months later. So you could use it as a KWL activity and revisit and keep adding to. So that's great as well. Drawbacks, some of the drawbacks you don't learn until you actually use it. And one of them we noticed was that students can be kicked off. So sorry, Aaron, kept trying to get on and it just kept kicking you off. And sometimes we don't know these until we actually try them. So just being aware that sometimes students might be trying, but they may not be able to access that tool. And also the visual space can be limited. I posted my own screenshots and then I posted about 8 different things and the space already seemed to be getting full. Although you can scroll around and there's plenty of space, but a lot of times students don't want to scroll. So if you have a large class or you want to use this for multiple classes, the space can get limited or full pretty quickly. The final tool I have is Chatzy, and Chatzy is a private chat room tool that allows for students to converse in real time. So if you are familiar with the AOL instant messaging tool and participated in conversations using that device, this is going to be something that you're going to get the hang of very quickly. It allows you to set up a chat room that is safe for your students, so you're not going to have creepy people randomly joining your chat. So you can set up a private room. If you want to set up a private room, you have to log in, but it's free, so I would recommend setting it up. And then students can join. I would recommend having students join with their name. They can make up their own names, but if I was using it in my class, I would make students use their real names so then I can track their conversations. So then my lesson objective here is students will be viewing a short video on the biography of an author we will be studying in class. I will provide each small group with a question they need to answer about that author. All answers can be found in the video. They need to post their answer to Chatzy by the end of viewing the 4-minute bio clip. So in my class, I do a lot of videos for the introduction of an author. Students prefer listening to a professionally made video as opposed to listening to me speak, which is just fine. But another way to bring in technology would be to have them engage in this discussion room activity. And something else you probably noticed is that I said to provide each small group with a question. I have my room, at least in my middle school classroom I had collaborative groups. So I would give each group a question because I know if you gave one question to the entire class, so my class sizes ranged from 20 to 31 kids depending on the hour. If you gave it one question, you would have that one student who posts and then the rest of the class would just sit right back and listen and not do anything. So this way everyone has to be paying attention, contributing to the discussion, so they all have to build off of each other and learn from each other. So no one can just sit back and wait. So for me, the standards I chose, for me, communication and collaboration fit really well with this lesson because you have to use your tool to communicate your message. You're working together. You have to get information from each other. You can't just sit back and hope that the information comes to you through osmosis. You are participating in this online interactive community, so digital citizenship is also a must. For me, the teacher standard, because this is an interactive, collaborative community, I think promoting and modeling digital citizenship is a must here. that because it's happening in real time, you're really able to model that digital citizenship. When discussions happen asynchronously and students are doing it at home for homework, it's harder to hold them accountable. You can, and we do, but when it's happening live and in class and you can pull that discussion up and you can project it on the board, you can have those real-time conversations and you can troubleshoot and problem solve. And if a student's not using it wisely, it can be a teachable moment and there can be consequences that happen immediately. So they can have that immediate feedback, and especially for younger learners, I think that's essential for building that digital citizenship. And then for my standard, my college and career readiness standard, I chose the production and distribution of writing. When students are engaging in this type of writing, I find that they need a lot of practice. So they need to learn how to produce clear and coherent writing for this appropriate task and for the audience. They need to learn that this is not a quick text. Students are having to learn from each other. They need to be able to get the answers from each other. And since they have to get answers from each other, a lot of times their initial response is not enough. So then students, I make them go back on and say, well, you need to then ask so-and-so a follow-up question. And so that's, again, a teachable moment. Well, how do you pose a question online so it doesn't sound rude or condescending or abrasive? And so all of this is a teachable moment for students that's happening in real time, although you're using a digital tool. So overview benefits, it's multitasking. And so all of my research is showing that the collaborative technologies and the digital natives, they need this multitasking format. And while you're having the video playing in the forefront, the students can be participating in this online discussion, posting their responses, asking follow-up questions. So it allows for multitasking in a productive educational format. It allows all students to have a voice. So sometimes we have those students that are not comfortable asking questions in front of a large group, and it allows them to have that voice because sometimes they need that shield of technology to feel comfortable, and that's okay. And it allows for that immediate feedback, like I said, from the educator to help prompt and problem solve if need be. Drawbacks, you need to be a multitasker, and I thought of some of my students that I've had in the past, and multitasking is not their strength. And so you have to be aware that if you're asking students to do 2 tasks at one time, can you break it apart? Can they do a part 1 and then a part 2? And if they can, that's great. If it has to be done 2 tasks at one time, is there one task that's more important than the other? And if so, which one do you want them to focus on? Because we all have those students in our room that are not going to be able to do 2 tasks at one time. So just be aware of that. And then this type of technology works best for a 1-to-1 ratio. I understand that is not plausible in every single classroom. My classroom was one that 1-to-1 ratio was very hard to come by. So if you can have a 2-to-1, if students can partner up, even if it's 4-to-1, you can do a small group. That works the best. But 1-to-1 is the most ideal situation for this type of conversation to take place. So just an overall reflection. Collaborative technologies go beyond the collaborative standards. So hopefully you're able to see that you can incorporate a lot of the different standards into these, that you're able to connect the research standards, the digital citizenship standards, the critical thinking standards, that it really can incorporate a lot more standards. It just depends on what type of lesson you want to design. And something that's really important, and we've talked a lot about in the class, is that the tool is only as good as the person using it. So we can't just expect to give students the collaborative tool and say, here you go, just engage in this on your own. When we give them collaborative technology, we're still going to have to be a part of the conversation. We can't just expect them to engage with it and then be done. They really still need that in-person discussion, and they still need to learn from each other. I think that the collaborative tools is just, again, a tool. They really need to learn from their peers. They need to be able to troubleshoot and problem solve and build from each other in order for the tool to be the best that it can be. And we've had this discussion a lot about the role of the teacher is changing. We are no longer the lecturer in front of the room. We are no longer the sage on the stage. But how do we shift? And I think if we start looking at collaborative technologies and start implementing them correctly, the role will just naturally change. And when I was reading a book for a class last semester by Richardson called Blogs, Wiki, Podcasts, and Other Powerful Web Tools for Classrooms, he does a really nice job of explaining what the role of teachers will be. He says that teachers will become connectors, content creators, collaborators, and coaches. And I think that's a nice way to describe the role of teachers in the future, with technology being more prevalent in the classrooms. So I think if we start really utilizing these tools, that we will become those coaches and those collaborators for our students, and we can really allow them to have the voice in our classroom as opposed to having our voice be the dominant voice. And then here are just the resources that I used.